Good morning, folks. Welcome to Coffee with Artists. My name is Rachel Wilkins. I am your host here and the founder of Conception Arts. Delighted this morning to be joined by Anita Trombetta. Anita received her BFA at SUNY New Paltz in 2011. She works out of Brooklyn, Gowanus, and she is the founder of the co-director of Meeting House, which is an annual traveling art residency. So Anita, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Rachel.
And I'm glad to see you've got something in your cup this morning. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking water because I already had 2 cups of coffee, and it's in my MTA museum cup.
Nice, very nice. Black coffee all the way for me, and I need about 6 cups to get going. So I want to talk a little bit about your journey since you graduated. So you graduated from SUNY in 2011, and now you're obviously based in Brooklyn, working out of your studio in Gowanus. What was that kind of 10 years like? Did you come straight to Brooklyn? Are you originally from the New York metropolitan area? Tell us about that.
So I've lived in the Hudson Valley. I grew up in the Hudson Valley, and I went to New Paltz. I graduated, and I returned home for a little bit and did some interning at the Hudson Valley Contemporary Art Museum, spent 6 months there, and then went straight to the city, did various art assistantships, and essentially, worked a little bit day jobs and built up sort of just moving from different studio spaces and really sort of just getting to know the community and building relationships with people here in Brooklyn. So it's been about 8 years, and I'm settled where I am in Gowanus.
And New Paltz is kind of like this quirky little artsy town. I had the pleasure of going up there a couple of years ago, and it was a friend and I had gone there, for a little getaway weekend, a girls' weekend, and it was like 8 feet of snow everywhere.
Yeah.
Noticed there was just like this beautiful part of the world, but full of students, like this beautiful little town, but like absolutely jam-packed with students. Was it a fun place to go to college?
I mean, it was a great place to incubate during those years. And I have so many great relationships with artists who I went to school with there and now live in the city, and we, are still members of the same community. So it was a really great way to be in contact with New York, but also having that sort of like solitude just to work and be in nature, and also at the same time have contact with, New York City. So
yeah, I don't know about for you, but New York City or Manhattan, the images of that I would see when I was growing up, I was always just in awe of it. There was something magical about the city, and I knew like very early on that this was like a place I had to visit. Did you feel that pull as a young person?
Well, so I grew up about 50 minutes outside the city, and it was a pretty isolated place. But I grew up going, to the Med, and my mom took me to the Art Students League as a kid. So it had magic, definitely. It was definitely something that I knew I wanted to be part of my life just every day.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there really is no place like New York for an artist. It's phenomenal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree.
So growing up as a young person just outside of, New York, did you feel that desire to create whilst you were, a young person in mainstream education, where quite often academia is the focus and the barometer for success? Did you feel that drive early on?
Definitely. I mean, I come from a family of makers. My grandmother was a professional painter. My mom is an artist, and just everyone in my family, participates in some form of making, whether it be brewing beer or gardening or working with your hands, really. So it's kind of like in our family fiber.
In your DNA.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so I noticed when I was doing my research that, often your work kind of bridges a few mediums that you sculpt, you obviously you have a lot of drawing, works on paper, and you also paint as well. How have you managed to stay true to your own style, even in these periods of kind of experimentation? How have you been able to do that?
So I've been kind of grappling with this recently, and I think that it all will sort of meld together through whether you're working abstractly or representationally. And I'm sort of interested in staying between those things and not defining too hardly, because I feel like, yeah, I incorporate some sculptures into my drawing now, and I think it becomes part of your language of abstraction and representation. And essentially, I mean, I'm always interested in, it always comes down to the same subject matters that I'm kind of working with, whether it comes through in sculpture or painting, abstract painting. At the end of the day, I think my language is always in there, if that makes sense.
What do you think are I guess, what challenges you most about each of those mediums, or what do you feel most comfortable working within? Does it vary?
I'm definitely I would say a painter's painter. And I feel most comfortable in the drawing and painting arena. I've worked abstractly, but loosely based with observational art for many years. I probably spent about 4 years painting very abstract paintings, sort of out of, abstract expressionist route. And now I am working primarily in representation and observation intensely, mostly due to like the time that we have now and the, navigating the space of our homes. So I feel, I wouldn't say comfortable is the word, but I feel it's the most authentic to what I'm experiencing right now.
How are you navigating this new normal? I mean, it's funny because a lot of the artists that I speak to, they're like, well, it's not really that different. Like, this is my day-to-day looks a lot like quarantine. Like, how are you impacted by it? You mentioned you're working at home, obviously. So tell us a little bit about the impact on you personally.
Well, so I'm primarily working from home. I'm lucky to still have access to my studio. So I am going there to paint, but primarily sort of lowering impact and staying home for the most part. I think it's a deep dive into the solitude of being an artist, living in New York, being used to going to openings, and every type of distraction can be, important to who you are as an artist, but also, I'm realizing more with this time, it's just we're very lucky to have these intense drives to keep focused on what is important to us, I think, as artists.
It almost feels like we've been given the opportunity to have like a stay-home residency sometimes.
Right. It's like a residency that's like riddled with anxieties, but the more that I'm able to focus in on these drawings and get really just look so hard at something that can seem so trivial or insignificant, like, part of a carpet or electrical cord or the leaf of a plant. The more hours I spend and enjoy and maybe able to be present. So it's had a really positive impact, I think.
It's wonderful. You mentioned joy and enjoyment and pleasure. Are these things that you find in your work? Is it a place that you go to when you're seeking that?
I think for me, painting is intrinsically tied to pleasure and enjoyment. That's really, I think, and that kind of answers your question from before. I think just enjoying and the visceral experience of being physical with something. I think, and that's maybe why I'm working so large right now. I can be active and move my arm, and just really get into the drawing and build it. And essentially, I think these drawings and paintings are, they're littered with reference to pleasure, and so plants and sensual fibers. I really want the what I'm depicting and also the method of depicting to carry that across.
So I read on your in your artist statement this sentence, which I think is wonderful. It says, boundless sexuality and bodily experience can exist within banality. So there's quite obvious sexual overtones, sexual undertones within your works, without the obvious and expected human form. So can you tell us more about that kind of juxtaposition of banality and erotica and how that works?
And I was thinking about that the other day because, I mean, these drawings are pretty bound to, they actually exist within limits as well. And it's funny because I do find something about them. There's like a repression as well as a desire to get free. So like within this piece behind me, I have like a fly tape, going up, it's trapped in a fly tape, and but also, wild hair and fibers, and that all exists within the same thing. So I think it's a big contradiction that exists of freedom versus restriction. And I think, so I think that's what, I think of.
What are some of the kind of feedback that you get when folks actually, examine your work or standing in front of your work? What are the responses like?
I hear a lot about just the pleasure of looking, the pleasure of experiencing. People, it's different when I'm working abstractly because, the interpretations become a little bit more like about, what you see in it and, figuration coming through. So I'm working a little bit more, I'm feeling a little bit more and enjoying the boundaries of representation, I think, right now. And also the freedom that kind of enables within that. So it's sort of a shift for me at this point.
So, talking about boundaries, one of the things that I noticed about your work is that, you don't stay within the constraints of the paper. You often expand and, add, and you were just mentioning to me before we jumped on that you add old paintings, cut old paintings up. Tell us how the process looks like. Do you set out with a certain vision of what the composition will look like, and then perhaps it evolves?
Yeah, so I create still lifes like using just magpie things from my apartment that I find appealing, and it's really an intuitive garden growing experience, I think. And I kind of, I'll put together still life, spend time with the still life, I'll do it for hours, and then I'll decide what the initial frame is, looking at, what do I really need? I want to have a 1-2 punch of what is going to really drive this piece home. But a lot of times I don't know, and I have to kind of let the piece unfurl as I go on. And I don't want to know too much, I think, about, where it's going. I want to ultimately surprise myself. And I think working up to the edges, working and getting real dark into at the edge and intensely working, rather than what I think is going to be a centerpiece, sometimes actually brings the piece to a new place and realization.
So you mentioned that you draw your inspiration from kind of objects within your living space. What else informs your creative practice? What other kind of people, places, things, life experiences?
So it's a little bit of everything. I kind of have a wide variety of interests in my life. I mean, I am, I love gardening. I have a little, small urban garden in my concrete garden with milk crates. And I think it's a lot of flaneur, walking around, just seeing things and objects that I love that I build into the vocabulary of my work. So I, a milk crate on the side of the street. It's a lot of things like detritus that I find laying around in the city that's repeats itself over and over again. I find really interesting and try to integrate those elements into what I'm working with. Right now, it's a little bit more concentrated on what is within the boundaries of my home and what I have available. And I have a little bit less inclination to go towards things I find on the street interesting right now. But that'll come back, I'm sure.
So Suzanne has a question here. I'm going to jump over to this because it's a great question. She says, your paintings are typically so strong with color. Are you missing or enjoying the lack of color in your drawings?
Well, I've just gotten back. Thank you, Suzanne. I've just gotten back into, now I've translated a few of these into paintings. But honestly, I was having a little bit of a color crisis in meaning, and I'm working on expanding my color vocabulary right now by doing small exercises with brush strokes and incorporating new colors into my work that, you know, I'm able to work with intuitively, but not randomly. So I guess the answer to that question would really be that I'm not missing it too much. I'm actually kind of enjoying some of the limitations and just working with value and form and light.
Awesome. Thank you, Suzanne. Great question. So, you know, something else from your artist statement. You said you warp and skew paint into abstractions that speak to the body, the delight of horror and sexuality. So traditionally, for centuries in art, women's bodies have kind of been the muse. You know, what role do you feel that we play today in opening up a conversation about desire and the fact that really women's desire is very rarely talked about or focused on? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that it is something that has been so obviously with like the male gaze and skewed through this filter throughout art history, and I think there is a real there's just sort of a lack of I mean, of course, in the last like 50 years, that comes through with like more women's voices being in art. But I think that it's hard to put into words, I guess. I don't know.
It's a tough one, but I think it's important that we talk about it because, like you said, the male gaze has been such a predominant force in how art history is looked at, what we celebrate, who we celebrate, and I think quite often just female voices talking about desire in general, whether that's through literature, art, or whatever, it's often seems to be so taboo. Like, oh my gosh, there's a woman talking about desire or talking about sex in their work. But I see the tones in your work. Is there ever any?
I think it's a lot of like just abjection in general and being cast out of what is considered, the proper lens of talking about sexuality. It becomes, for me, like, Kristeva's like powers of horror and the things she talks about with food and the law and women's bodies essentially being rejected and then, glorified as well. And I really, in these drawings, kind of want to make, I think, through plants and the forms of wood and fruits and vegetables, like a really suggestive peach or something, or a bag even, something inorganic, I think you can make reference and build into these like sort of, I think female sexuality and sexuality in general, but particularly women's bodies are particularly boundless and not, it's curviness and rather than something that is rectangular or directed.
So you talked a little bit about, what should I say? We talked in the beginning a little bit about this residency that you founded in. It's kind of a traveling residency. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So my dear friend Claudia Santiso and we both came together. We did a residency in southern France together with Suzanne and Christy Powers as well in 2018. And we decided that we would try to do something in New York and bring New York artists out of the city, and we rented out a old church upstate in Troy, New York, and brought 21 artists up for mini residencies over a month. And so since then, we've curated various shows incorporating those artists and the larger community of artists. And hopefully in the future, we can do another one when things are safe and everything.
And you're somebody who's participated in residencies. What does that give you as an artist?
I think the solitude and also community. So it's really a time that you're in a new space that's not, your home or your studio. And it's just time, similar to now, but in a more idyllic setting, hopefully. And yeah, time and community, I think, where you'll go work and then you'll have a meal with fellow artists, have discussions. I think it really is magnifying your everyday, rather than what you do in your everyday life as an artist where you live. I think you're sort of stripped away of all your work staring at you, and you say, I have a month to make a new body of work. And yeah, so it kind of, for me, it's like, it's sort of a challenge because, here you are in a new space without anything, talking to you.
What does that look like for you? Have you been able to go into those experiences and come out with something that challenges you, or that you...
Yeah, I think it could be really transformative. I just also think that, in residencies, I've just worked on color or simple things that it might not be something that is like your most intensely ambitious piece, but it could also just be like being in a new place and observing, building and collecting color ideas, form, light, and then bringing it home and translating it. So I think you can come at it from various directions, whether you're going to be lock yourself into the studio and not talk to anyone, or just sort of get to know people and enjoy the place and time.
It must have been interesting to spend that time in the church, of all places. I mean, something that's, traditionally a spiritual place. Like, and you actually slept in the church, I believe, right?
Yes.
I've heard little snippets about it, but how important were your surroundings, first of all? And also, community is something that we've been talking about a lot on the show, in that, for so many movements throughout history, there was always this very kind of tight-knitted community. And I have to laugh, and I'm going to out you on this, Suzanne, but before we jumped on, Suzanne said, our little coven of artists are excited to watch. And you have a little group of women, female artists who, you support each other. How important is that for you?
Yeah, we're especially feeling very witchy during these times, I think.
Watching this morning. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it really, I would not be the artist I am today without a really strong community that we all support each other and help each other with materials and ideas and constantly sharing. I mean, throughout this pandemic, I've, reached out to artists just asking about something compositionally. And I think that, it's a lot of solitude, but also, you really cannot, I wouldn't be who I am as an artist without people around me. And throughout these still lifes that I'm making right now, they're like full of things that people have given me. So like gifts and sculptures from other artists or paintings from other artists. It's like you're never really alone, you can constantly, even just using certain techniques or something, it's like a gift from another artist.
Do you welcome or seek critique?
Yeah, I absolutely, yeah, for sure. I was a member of New York City Crit Club for about a year and a half, and still participate. And I'm doing a small quick group right now during the pandemic that is just sort of a, weekly meeting to sort of bring new ideas to your work.
How does that look? I mean, I've never been a part of a critique group, but I know several artists that benefit tremendously from having that kind of very small, tight-knit group. First of all, how do you offer feedback and how do you receive it for somebody who's maybe never done that before?
I think as an artist, arriving at critique, just sort of knowing how to asking the important questions that you really kind of want to talk about with your work. Cold reads are also, for me, helpful to sort of see what just people get from the work. But I also think that, having a question and, I oftentimes see so much more in my work when other people come and, talk about it with me. So yeah, I absolutely love critiques. I love looking at other people's work. I get a lot from looking at or participating in other people's critiques. And you learn a lot about yourself through that as well. So it's all part of the greater, I guess, hive brain sort of as artists.
We talk about art fatigue being a real thing. Especially I find that when, like, for something like Armory Week or Freeze Week, where you want to go out and you want to experience all of this amazing, incredible talent that is out there, but quite often certainly for me, I want to keep this on me, but that I can find that to be a very negative thing to experience sometimes, in that it will inform me or give me too many points of view, so that when I go into the studio, sometimes I'm questioning everything. Do you ever feel that way?
Absolutely. And I think that the overflow of information that we get from online, from, seeing images constantly. I think that there's times to take in and digest it. And then there's times to say, this is my voice and this is what interests me. And that's authentically, me, so, or whatever is authentic, whatever that means, but so, yeah, I feel that way all the time. And I think right now is a really good time to go deep into yourself and to, say what genuinely feels right when I'm making work, opposed to, what I think is responding to something that I saw, or, yeah.
So what does your routine look like? Are you somebody that works through artist blocks? Or are you somebody that has a daily practice? Or are you somebody that waits more for that inspiration?
I definitely have a daily practice. I paint or draw in some form every day. Also by incorporating that with day job, and also, just going to openings. And so now I am working probably 40 hours a week drawing, which is amazing. But yeah, I definitely try to go into the studio, every other day, and then, working in sketchbooks and writing, and sort of just like, I realize that developing like source material, going for walks for me is really important when I'm not in like pandemic mode.
Yeah. And it's a very unique time for sure. There was I read something by the author Glennon Doyle. She put something out on social media this week that said, there's so much pressure, especially on creatives right now. Einstein created this during quarantine, and you should be making your best work. And she said, this is, for a lot of us, this is just kind of the time in between. Like, this is the becoming time. This is where we just settle into what's happening around us in preparation for the new ideas. And I think that's, we can put so much pressure on ourselves.
Yeah, I also think that like all the time is becoming time, right? Like, it feels so weird to be like definitively like, this is the time. It puts too much pressure on yourself. I think but I really do think like, and I was listening to Jerry Salt's new book. And I think just for me, drawing and just like what is pleasurable of moving your hand around, and that's kind of like propelled me to make work and to keep producing during this time. But I think otherwise, putting the pressure of saying, oh, I have to, finish my screenplay, or, come out with it, write and, make a new album or something. I think that's what can be undue pressure on an artist, and sort of, these things all happen organically, I think.
How would you say your approach to your work has evolved over time?
So I think it's been, largely always intuitive for me. I've always been really interested in just looking at other art and throughout art history, and bringing that into my paintings. I used to just love going to museums as a kid, and it's kind of coming full circle for me right now, like process-wise, and what I'm looking at coming back into the work. So I don't really look at it for me as something that's like linear. I think that we're always from childhood kind of a similar type of artist. I remember that when I was a kid, I used to draw like mozzarella cheese containers, like with landscapes on them. So like I had that interest in objects, I think, and food and like the everyday. And I'm still doing it now. So I think that the means and methods and what, and how you depict it grows through seeing other art and talking to other artists. And I think it sort of just evolves into your own voice after time. Yeah.
That's a really beautiful point about creating the way that you did when you were a child today. It made me think about a story that my mom always likes to tell. Because I always had crayons in my hands as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a single mom, and so she would take me to work with her some days. And I'd asked her for a pink, a red, a green, a blue, a brown. I listed all these colors of crayons. I said, I need these colors. Mm-hmm. And she said, what is it that you're drawing? And I said, I'm drawing your hair. Highlights at the time and this crazy hair, so she kind of tells that now. But when I think about it, I still kind of create like that. I'm still very haphazard, and color speaks to me, and so that's a really interesting point. That's something I've never really thought about before.
Yeah, I love that story. I think that it really does come from this like essential place as an artist that has always been there, and I think throughout one's life it will the desire to create will wax and wane, but I think it's always there.
100%.
Yeah.
So let's go back to talking about your kind of the subject matter. So one of the really interesting parts of your work, you talk about using food, post-consumer waste, and other perishables as a departure point, so as a jumping off point. What is it about the decay that interests you?
So that's a good question. I think like decay of objects, and also I think that the decay of like the medium and I like to like rip off parts of the painting or or of the drawing, or if I'm painting, I would pour turpentine over something and let the paint sort of obliterate itself. So yeah, I think it's sort of, I think with still life, I think it's a little bit of like a memento mori. Destruction and creation, growth. I think it's like for me, like the crux of making things, and sort of letting like a painting have its own life through that, of saying where does it start and where does it end? Not feeling too finished, but also arriving at a point where you really can't, you can't go any further. Yeah, that's it.
But I wonder what that looks like for you, because you literally do go further. You go beyond the constraints of the piece of paper or the canvas that you start with. So is there how does that look for you? When do you know something is complete?
Yeah, I think it's sort of when it beats you, when you're done. when you feel like it physically cannot anymore. I don't know, I'm trying to have a little bit more of an easeful approach to things nowadays, and not so but yeah, so, and there's a painting in my studio I'm working on right now that has extended, and I've put different parts that aren't even attached, so like a hanging plant will be in the corner. And I'm really just trying to, like, right now I'm grappling with that question of something that can go on forever. How do you decide? And I think it's kind of like this funny place of like heaven and hell. Like you just can't, you have to stop, like, because you can't contain everything in one. And just sort of making a decision that, okay, I'm looking at this panoramic room right now and I'm incorporating all of these elements that, you know, sort of, you're incorporating elements that, you know, is it possible to keep? It is possible, it always is, but sort of, I guess when I look at it, like these spaces are sort of bodies, I think. And the still lifes as bodies. So they're at some point, like, you know, it can contain so much, but I don't know, I guess it just sort of beats you.
Beats you into submission for sure.
Yeah.
So I feel like your work, just the how it's constructed, lends itself very much to installation. Is that something that you've considered, or something that you've experienced before or planned on?
Yeah, I have some ideas and thoughts about bringing it into the outside world, and sort of, I guess I kind of have to work with, it's a challenge because in the home, you know, things are a certain scale. When you're out in the world, I think that there's more expansiveness that I have to figure out how to incorporate in a finite amount of space. So yeah, I definitely am interested in working with that. I'm interested in using some found material, like found reference material, more so, because I kind of already am with like books and like drawing a book or drawing a label. It's all found. So maybe I've been thinking of like using, you know, like the idea of a magazine clipping inside of something in another place. You know, thinking about right now with like using Zoom and talking to people all over the world. You could be anywhere, be in a museum virtually. So I am thinking about created spaces, but, you know, sort of bringing it into the outside world right now. I'm not 100% sure, because I don't, you know, I would love to like set up post out on like a street where like there's like wood that I can staple some paper to and just start working. But it's sort of just seeing what the circumstances are and wait till the weather warms up a little bit too.
It's going to be interesting to see how the art world does respond to this, and how we, you know, how we experience exhibits. Like, I mean, there's a whole ton of questions around, you know, what that's going to look like. Are we going to be able to even go to institutions? How is that going to look? So I think it's going to take some time for anything to resume any kind of normalcy. That's for sure.
Yeah, I definitely just miss going to museums, going to galleries so much, and being with the work physically.
I know. I don't think the digital exhibits are cutting it right now.
No. And that's kind of where, you know, working on your own work, doing digital critiques, I think it could be a really great way to sort of get through the time, I think.
So you talked about accompanying the pleasure of consumer frenzy, and then the idea of anxiety about the environment. You know, it's a time where kind of consumerism is really tipped on its head, and we have really a big opportunity to make impactful changes in how we live our lives and how we coexist together as humans, as, you know, as creatives. What role do you think that the artist plays in these shifts that we are seeing coming?
So yeah, I think that bringing awareness of, you know, our relationship to how we consume is something that an artist can bring, or, you know, of course, like carrying across messages. Yeah, I don't know exactly if my work is, it's definitely talking about the environment and what is natural and synthetic and unsynthetic. I guess I sort of am just kind of interested in like the limits of that and where, like a piece of corn or, with genetic engineering or how that sort of relates to the body. But I'm not really sure exactly if the work, it has an environmentalist stance per se. But I'm definitely interested in, the boundaries of the synthetic, I guess.
So as creatives, I think we generally are more sensitive, shall we say, than the general public. We experience things usually very emotionally. How does what's happening right now impact your work creatively? Are you feeling the heaviness of the moment?
Yes, very much so. I do think, but I also know that like there is some sense of universality to it, that everyone's kind of going through it. That, throughout history, events like, the Spanish flu or, world wars, that, this is a part of our history. And I think that for me, responding by making is kind of tying myself into that history, I think. So I just thinking about like this drawing behind me, I'm, kind of enjoying my rich inner world, but also aware that there's like barbed wire fences everywhere, or just, chain link fences and limits and boundaries.
So, from a practical standpoint, as artists, many of us don't right away have the ability to have a sustainable income from just creating art. And many of us do have to have day jobs. What are your kind of aspirations in terms of where you would like your career to go? Or is that even something that, it concerns you? Do you feel that you create just for you, or do you feel there's a bigger plan?
At the end of the day, I create for myself, but I think that I wouldn't be, it's just, if it was just me alone in my apartment, I never showed anybody my drawings, that wouldn't be a satisfying experience either. I mean, I definitely desire to, show more extensively when it's the right time. And I think that, I mean, I definitely, work in the normal world, work a day job, which is, I'm a court stenographer. So, so I hear a lot of stories and record a lot of just like historical things that happen in our city and our world. But yeah, I mean, it's, and I don't mind that. I don't mind that as a day job, but I also, my art is me. So it's really going to be something that is a lifelong exploration and journey. And so I hope that I keep on growing and improving as an artist, and that other people respond to the work. I think ultimately it's not really about, I guess, getting the attention. I think it's more about like, is the work also serving other people as well as somebody being affected by it? I hope so. If it's just one person, then great.
What has been some of the most impactful feedback that you've had? Have you had anything that's struck you as particularly profound over the years?
I had a wonderful critique on Monday with my Zoom group. And it sort of just, sent me back, and I was able to actually write down. I have a hard time verbalizing sometimes because I am a very abstract person. But yeah, I mean, I just sort of validating that what I'm saying is making sense, and I'm able to put that into words.
It's amazing. All right, folks, so we're going to take some questions. There is quite a few people on today, so do jump in, folks, with questions for Anita. We will be answering them right here in about 5 minutes or so. So I guess on that note, do we need validation as artists? Do we need somebody to say, I relate to that? That piece is great. Is it an essential part of being a creative? Somebody shared something a couple of days ago about going back to kind of the child again. Like as a child, if you made something creative, and the first thing you want to do is run downstairs and show your mom, right?
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I think validation is tied into creating anything. I think it's like somebody responding to it and hearing your voice, I guess. And, I think if we were just creating alone in a vacuum, I think, I don't think it should only be validation. I think response and reaction and questions are all equally, important. Yeah.
What would you say has been your best accomplishment, or maybe kind of an aha moment for you in your career?
So I had a really wonderful experience. There's been a few really personally rewarding. I do think that like Meeting House was really, really important to my development personally in my community. And I just sort of, to the point of the community and connecting, I think just really having that network of artists and people that are on the same kind of solitary journey as you, but also want to connect and want to show you what they're working on as well. I think it brings together like, what is the point of all of this? Why spend 40 hours on a work of art? I think it's really like the community and the people who are you're connecting to.
So what's kind of next for you? What are your aspirations for moving forward? And obviously ignore this moment that we're experiencing. If it was post-pandemic, let's say, PP.
I think continuing just growing and challenging myself. I can't wait to go. I really want to go to the Met and sit and draw like sculptures. Yeah, I want to go. I really just want to kind of keep deep diving into myself. Of course, more residencies and any opportunities that may come across would be super welcome. But yeah, just continuing as an artist, I think.
All right, so we got a couple of questions here, but I'm going to say I want to be a part of this coven because it sounds amazing. And I'm feeling very witchy right now.
We'll do some recipes for potions after.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we have a question from Frank Chalas. So Chalas, I apologize if I'm butchering your name, Frank. You are pretty funny. What are your thoughts on humor in your artworks, yours and others?
So I always wanted to be an improv artist, stand-up comedian growing up. But I definitely have a little bit too much stage fright for that. I definitely think humor, and I really enjoy humor in work, and just sort of like sometimes quiet humor. I love humor. The funnier, the better.
And there's a
so serious.
Right, and there's again a big part of humor is vulnerability as well. We're setting ourselves up for judgment like we do with art.
Yes, absolutely.
So Leo has a question here. The need for validation may be part of the process. How do you get past work that gets zero attention? I found my ideas of what looks great can be very different than what other people think. Great question, Leo.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like your internal barometer, you have to always follow that. I think at the end of the day, it's with like online and social media, you could sometimes post something and that you think is the best thing that you ever done, and you get not as many likes as you think, and I think that is sort of can be detrimental. while on the other hand, it is nice to feel like, okay, people are responding to this. Sometimes it doesn't always line up. And I think that following your gut, but also being open to hearing other people's feedback on why something works for them it's a balancing act, I think.
So an interview that I did earlier this week with Sari Shryak, she is a millennial, right? I'm not a millennial. I'm about to hit 40. But it was an interesting perspective because she talked about how a lot of her work centers around memes and pop culture of today. And she said, that is my landscape. That's my digital landscape. That's where I spend my time. When you think about the painters back in the day who were, plein air painters who were influenced by their environment, they were painting what they saw and experienced in life. Whereas today we do live a lot in the virtual space. As somebody who draws from objects and surroundings, do you find that you go online for that experience?
I'm kind of an old soul. I've always been. I find my work has a sort of traditional tilt at times. I definitely love looking at old masters and abstract expressionists. I feel akin to a different time, but that is the landscape we're living in and consuming a lot of the art that we look at. So and a lot of the media we look at. So it's undeniable that it's influencing. I think my desire to make, plastic art is the desire to not be on a screen. It's contradiction. I mean, it's always part of how you show your art, and but I don't really feel akin to it, but I am. I'm a millennial. But I think that, I definitely am interested a lot in history. So, whether somebody finds it immediately relatable, it depends on the person. And some people might say this feels traditional, and in some ways it is.
And it's so saturated with data and information and visual experiences that it can just be completely overwhelming at times.
Yeah. You mean the digital platforms? Yeah. Or yeah.
But I feel like we're in this unique moment in time where we're kind of at the crux of entering into a fully digital, immersed virtual reality world and still having these ties to, the actual experience. So I think that it's good that we as artists are still looking back to those old masters, because who knows where we're heading.
Yeah, I think that being with physically with something that someone makes is still an experience and always will be an experience, because we are animals. I think that's having purely digital experience isn't really plausible, or for me as a person. I don't.
I agree. All right, so we got another question here from Jiggly414. I'm guessing that's probably not your real name, but that's okay. What is your most important artist tool? Is there something that you can't live without in your studio? Great question.
A good variety of brushes, pencils, charcoal. I definitely use a lot of pencils and charcoal to lay out my work. There's a lot. I mean, it can be very demanding for me of if I don't have one thing, it just sort of can send me off, especially in the studio. But it's pretty soothing now to be working mostly on pencil and paper, because there's I feel like I can do anything with it. So yeah, I guess pencils.
Awesome. And another one, Ed Mulligan. Hello, I'm finding a lack of inspiration during this isolation. I think you just mentioned the surge of creativity you're experiencing during this time. Can you speak a bit more about how that is for you? Thanks. I think for both visual and musical artists, this has become a real thing to work through.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of dread going on with just being physically away from our community of people, and can be different dialogues about, just sort of people, or just being hard on yourself about what you're supposed to be making right now or doing. And I think there's just like really no rules right now of how to create, what to create. I think if we just can pretend as artists that not that what you make doesn't matter, but just sort of just putting one, you know, if you're a musician, playing some notes, you know, I think it all starts with just the very elemental and fundamental parts of making. And I guess not being too hard on yourself if it doesn't come out or sound the way you want it to. For me, I'm just sort of lowering my expectations or desires or of what I want a piece to look like, and just sort of being in the moment of what feels authentic and visceral to me.
Wonderful. All right. So I don't see any more questions coming through. So Anita, if you can just tell folks where they can learn more about you, where they can check out your work, that would be great.
So my website is anitatrombetta.com, and my Instagram is also Anita Trombetta.
Fantastic. Right. Okay. So I've added the website to the comments, folks. Do go out and check out Anita's work. Anita, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It was a pleasure getting to know you and learn a little bit about your work. And thank you again.
Thank you so much for your questions. I'll send you that witch book later.
All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you to those watching on YouTube and on Facebook. We appreciate you, and we will be back again same time tomorrow. Until then, happy creating, folks.
Thanks, Rachel. Bye. Nice to meet you.